our country needs a bigger reset, a rediscovery of who we are, because no matter how fierce the storms of history, one of the great strengths of this nation has always been our ability to navigate a way to calmer waters. And yet this depends upon politicians.
Okay, well, that's the new Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, who's from the Tories, just won one of the biggest elections, maybe not since 1832. It turned out it wasn't quite that big, but one of the biggest ever, a big swing. And to try and unpack some of this about what it means and what we can expect here is Ian Puddick. Ordinarily, I say the smartest man in London, which I guess he is, but he's not actually in London today. Ian, good to have you on the show wherever you are.
I am in the middle of nowhere camping with a load of kids, and it is pouring with rain. A great British summer.
Well, I guess we got to have it. When news breaks, you got to go wherever you're at. So we appreciate time out. I hope the kids aren't running around in the rain alone anywhere.
They're soaked. They just soaked. Anyway, you know how it is.
Very good. Well, who's also soaked is Rishi Sunak's group there after that election there, which just drubbed them out. A lot of people were expecting that. And want to try and unpack a lot about what that means and kind of help our American audience especially understand what happened, because there's been lots of election swings throughout Europe and heading into the United States election. And we're trying to see if the trends that were at stake in the EU elections throughout most of Europe, in the French elections that just recently were held, and the next round's coming up here in just a day or two. What about this big swing in the UK? So, Gary, if you could put that first headline up there, we see that Keir Starmer has this big sweep to power, but I guess when you start looking at the numbers, it may not have been the biggest sweep that might have expected, or that it looks like anyway. And he says that, according to even this headline here, it says the honeymoon may be brief because people are expecting a lot of actions. And I know in his opening speech there, he seemed to really emphasize that it's going to take time to make a lot of changes. Like he doesn't want people to have big expectations, but it sounds like they do.
They do. I mean, they do. I mean, what the headline didn't say was that they had the lowest voter turnout, or it's either the lowest or the second lowest voter turnout in history. So not enough people voted. And there's a very, very good reason for that.
What is that?
There's a cigarette paper. There's a cigarette paper's difference between Labour and the Conservative Party. And our friend George Galloway, he would say they're both cheeks. So they're both cheeks of the same backside. And it's true. It's true. And people know that. So people are hacked off with the Conservatives. They've been in power for 14 years. There's lots of things that are very, very wrong. And they've just disconnected from the public. So people want change, but they also know that the change isn't going to come. Because the next biggest party is almost identical to them. So they become apathetic and don't bother to vote, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and see, that seems counterintuitive to an American audience. Hey, Gary, if you can put that other headline up there, why Labor lost worst in 200 years. We see this, and you would think, man, if this was the worst route in 200 years, they must have either been super angry at them, or they must have been super excited about the other side. And from what you're saying, there's a cigarette paper's worth of distance between them. So the question is, why did they go in such big numbers to the other party?
Well, it's a great question. So Britain, a bit like the States. You've got the Democrats and the Republicans. Over here, it's the Conservatives and Labour. There are much smaller parties, much smaller parties that just don't get a look in. And the reason they don't get a look in is because of our electoral system. So we don't have proportional representation like they do in Europe. We have first past the post. So, if we take Washington, D.C., for example, based on the UK voting system, if 100,000 people voted and 60,000 people voted for the Tories, and then the rest of the vote was split by everybody else, the vote goes to the Tories, and everybody else's votes are just cast aside. Are just cast aside. So the Reform Party, which is a relatively new party, got 4 million votes in the UK, which is huge. They were the second biggest party by votes, but because they didn't get enough overall votes, they only got 4 seats. I think 5 actually. There was another recount earlier, so they got a 5th seat. So 4 million people voted for them, and then they got 5 representatives in Parliament, which is rubbish. So yeah. It's a mess, really.
You're showing that turnout there. This, what you're talking about, it's either the lowest or one of the lowest turnouts in the last 100 years or so, from another thing I read. What is the reason for the apathy among the people? Why do they think that the politicians aren't going to get this done?
Well, they just, as I said, the Conservatives have been in power for 14 years. There's scandal after scandal. You know, during lockdown in 2020, there were, the police were enforcing, obviously, the lockdown rules. And yet in number 10 Downing Street, Boris Johnson was having a party. I actually had a beer 4 Saturdays ago with his lawyer. So he was asked, did you organise a party at number 10? Now, it's a yes or no answer. No, I didn't, or yes, I did, or yes, I did, but here's what happened, and you try and explain it. He couldn't answer that question. He had to pay a lawyer to answer that question. So it just immediately breeds, discontent, distrust, and it's just not good. And that's just a very minor example. I mean, when you start getting into food banks, the rise of food banks in the UK, it's the country's in a mess. The country's in debt. There's no money for anything. Tony Benn, an old Labour politician, people always say the best prime minister we never had. He would always say, there's money for war. There's always money for war. And he was right. And he's right. We've got plenty of money for war. I'm sure we'll come on to that in a few moments.
Yeah, in a few.
But that's the issue. There's just huge apathy because of the disconnect between the Conservative Party after 14 years and then the opposition is not really that different. So people just didn't bother.
But those that did bother obviously went for the opposition.
Well, they went for the opposition. They went for the opposition. They went for the Tory light version. So
what's going to happen now? So that headline there I had a second ago said he's probably going to have Starmer's going to have a pretty short honeymoon period where everybody's going to be happy. What are the people going to expect to see, and what are his biggest challenges in the immediate term?
Miracles. Miracles. He needs a magic wand, a magic money tree, and miracles. I mean, he's already. You'll hear this in the next 24 hours that he's already met with his representatives in the States and NATO, and we are going to commit to increasing our military spend so that we can fight the Russian aggression and all this kind of stuff, all the propaganda that goes with that. So he'll do that. So his argument for that is he's going to increase spending, increase borrowing, because he needs to borrow the money to spend to keep us safe from Putin and all this nonsense. But, if you're the average man on the street, and I'm talking about just normal working people, you've got a family, you've got high mortgage rates, because one of the previous Conservative prime ministers, Liz Truss, they crashed the economy because they're just stupid. And I personally am paying a significant, I don't mean just a few points, a significantly higher mortgage rate because of that. And I'm just, as we speak, literally in the next few weeks, I'm just remortgaging because it is starting to come down. But the last few years, my mortgage payments have been significantly higher because they crashed the economy. So, it's tough times, and it's tough times for many. So they're the reasons that there's this apathy, if that makes sense.
And is there anything that any politician can do? Can they actually fix the economy? Is it something that's like, oh, well, there's just some physical things you can do to change it? Or is it like, well, because it's connected to the global economy, there's really nothing they can do? What do you think about what the possibilities are?
Well, I would liken the British economy on a significantly smaller scale, like the US economy. So, the train system, the railway networks in the US are broken. They're decrepit. They're failing. They had the big chemical spill in East Palestine last year. But America is spending billions and billions on wars. So it's the same in this UK, but obviously in a much smaller scale. I don't want to exaggerate that. So the issues are the same. When I was out campaigning for George Galloway up in the north of the UK, I've said in a previous show, when we were knocking on doors, were people worried about Putin? Were people worried about wars? People worried about the roads, education, healthcare, just local issues that affect normal people. And that's just universal. I'm sure that's true of wherever you go. But the issue then is, how do they fix it? So as you said in your little introduction a few moments ago, he will need to pull some rabbits out of hats and wave some magic wands. He will need to borrow some money just to get people on side. But it's all short-termism. It's all short-termism. The UK debt is increasing. I think the US is 34 trillion plus. We're obviously significantly smaller, but our debt to GDP ratio is just nuts. That somebody needs to address the issues properly. But there's no. I was talking I had breakfast with George Galloway last Thursday morning, and he was saying to me, George is a Marmite character. You love him or hate him. He's very, very outspoken. But and he's an older man now, but an older man with lots and lots of wisdom and lots of experience. And he was saying when he was a young man in Parliament, there were loads and loads of big characters on the opposite sides, completely on opposite sides of the political spectrum. But he said it was fantastic because they would stand up for what they believed in, rightly or wrongly, and vice versa with him. And they could have really stimulating, interesting debates on trying to solve issues. He said, look at Parliament. I'm talking about the UK Parliament. Look at Parliament today. Who's in there? A bunch of nobodies that nobody's ever heard of. And they're there for whatever reasons, where there were principled people that wanted to make a difference. Now, I'm not saying all the people in Parliament today aren't principled and don't want to make a difference, but it's just they're just in a different league, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But the Reform Party have come in from nowhere. As I said, picked up 4 million votes. That's not really represented. As I said, they only get 4 or 5 seats. But Nigel Farage, love him or loathe him, is like George Galloway. He's a fantastic debater, very outspoken, and he's a man of action. He will get things done. So, whether you agree or disagree with him, you need people or figures or characters like that in Parliament to stimulate the debate and to try and make things happen. So I'm actually pleased because, from a democratic or from democracy's perspective, I think it's really important that we have these people in there. But there's just not enough of them.
Right. So then the question is for Starmer, let's keep it domestic for the moment. Does he have enough power or influence to affect the issues that you're talking about that has made people upset? Will he be able to fix the interest rates or the infrastructure so that people's lives can start improving? Is that even possible?
We shall see. It's crystal ball territory. We shall see. But he's got such a massive majority in the House. His own team, his own side, will support him. How far he wants to go is another story.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Is it like if that was in the American system? Let's say if it was, the Republicans and Democrats, and if one of the parties had that kind of a majority, I mean, they could almost do anything they wanted legislatively, which would seem to imply that if there are things that can be done to your point about taking action to actually fix some of these problems, it seems like he would have an opportunity to do that. The question is, are there things that majority can be used in order to fix?
Well, I'm you know me, Daniel. I'm a fairly positive person, so let's just hope that the answer to that is yes. You know, I mean, all these politicians have families. I mean, they're not stupid. They know
Well,
the state.
let me ask you the question in a different way. For example, in the United States, if someone wanted to come in and say, all right, we're going to start, we're not going to complain about the border. We're actually going to put some policies in to start fixing. Or like Trump said, I'm going to physically build a wall to stop some of that. Or some of these other people who say the infrastructure is falling apart, so I'm going to now pass a bill to allocate another $40 billion to rebuild a bunch of bridges and railroads, et cetera. Something that physically can be done with a legislative mandate. Are there those kinds of things in the British side that can be done?
I'm going to make your blood boil. And I promise you, I'm not here to make your blood boil. You're my friend and I like you. So to use the analogy that you just gave, so literally every single day, hundreds, 500, sometimes 1,000 illegal immigrants come over from France across the British Channel in small dinghies, and they are trafficked. So people go, so Nigel Farage from Reform, this is a massive issue for his party, which has made him really popular because he said, and he's called the far right a neo-Nazi. He's labelled with everything you can imagine. He's certainly right wing. Is he far right? No. Is he a neo-Nazi? Well, that's just ridiculous. But his argument is his wife is German and she lives here, and immigration is brilliant for Britain. And I agree with that because it is. I mean, Britain is a multicultural society, and people make contributions in all different ways, and it makes our nation strong. So that's good. So what the issue is illegal. The key is illegal, breaking the law. So these people that are coming in illegally on a daily basis pay people traffickers. Sometimes, and the newspapers have done investigations into this, 5,000 to 10,000. There's a lot of money for someone that's an illegal immigrant that's got no money. They've got, and they come over, and then obviously the government puts them up in hotels. They get private health care. You can Google this because what I'm going to say, people say is not true. They get a government credit card called an Aspen, ASPEN, an Aspen credit card, where their money goes onto that card, and it enables them to go and spend money and do stuff. And they're just here, and the government doesn't know where to put them. So initially, a few years back, they put them into a big redundant army barracks in Essex, and the army had to get it all done up and painted and put together, and they burnt it down because it wasn't to their liking.
Oh my!
So yeah, they burnt it down. It was national headlines for a bit. So now they're put into reasonably moderate hotels, not rubbish hotels, but 3-4 star hotels, and the government seconds the hotel, and they've got them throughout the UK, and the government doesn't know what to do with them. So Nigel Farage said, well, the first thing is the cost of this illegal immigration. I'm going to stop them coming over, which was why his party just rocketed in the elections very recently. He only became the leader of he was obviously a vice chairman or whatever he was of the party, but he became the leader, I think, about 5 weeks ago. And as soon as he got into the driving position, they just rocketed. So there is certainly, if you look at the numbers, the public want that to be addressed. Now, you mentioned, Keir Starmer, he, man of the people. Well, their policy is to reverse what Nigel Farage is doing. So to have unfettered immigration, whether it's legal or illegal. So that'll be a really interesting debate in Parliament when they start. The Tory party had this crazy idea about taking the illegals and putting them in planes and sending them to Rwanda.
Oh my!
George Galloway said that the British Navy is all around the world defending other people's borders. Well, let's get them to defend our border, pick them up and send them back to France. So that was George Galloway's. That was something that George Galloway stood on. Interesting times. So yeah, that will be a debate.
Well, yeah, like you say, we'll have to see how that works out. I mean, everybody, especially everybody in Britain, is going to be watching that. And I don't know if you've seen from your screen, but a number of folks we have watching from the UK right now seem to be agreeing with you that there's an issue there, and we'll see what the politicians do to actually address it. The other issue we want to talk about, which you mentioned a second ago, not surprisingly, is what impact this may or may not have on UK support of the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, you mentioned earlier in here that between the parties, there's a cigarette paper's worth of distance between them. But on this issue, there may not be any, as this exchange from actually 2023 shows.
And can I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments on Ukraine? It's something that not only the whole country can be proud of, but the entire House can be proud that we came together to stand by Ukraine when the moment mattered, and that we will continue to stand with them united as one Parliament and one United Kingdom.
Just for the record, is the Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for that answer, because every time Putin has been appeased, he's been back for more. And so does the Prime Minister agree with me that across this House we must speak with one voice and say this terrible conflict must end with the defeat of Putin in Ukraine?
Mr. Speaker, our objective remains to ensure a Ukrainian victory in this conflict. Vladimir Putin's aggression cannot be seen in any way to have been successful.
Okay, so if your objective is the defeat of Russia and the victory of Ukraine, as we've talked about here a lot, that is coming close to as a physical impossibility as it gets in human affairs. So it sounds to me like there is no space at all between Sunak and now Keir Starmer on this issue.
No, none at all. And I'm, just if I get my crystal ball out based on who I've been speaking to. In the next sort of 48 hours, Starmer will make a statement. 2 to 3 days, he is going to make a statement saying that he's met and spoken with his American counterparts. He's met and spoken with with NATO and the Foreign Office here in the UK, and we will be sending more stuff to Ukraine. And we're there to the end, and we will defeat Putin. And the British objective is we will not stop until Putin or the Russians leave Ukraine. And it's just absolute nonsense.
And will there be any? This is a silly question for me to ask you, because you're not the official spokesman for the British government, but one would wonder if they're going to say,
you won't want to give that job to me. Trust me.
No, I really would, because you would probably give me the right answer, the truth, whether it was good or bad. But what they're not going to say, I bet, using that same crystal ball from this side of the water here, is that they're not going to say how that help is, or that aid is going to help the Ukraine side. What the path to victory is going to be, how they expect that to turn the tide of what's actually happening on the ground. And my strenuous argument is, if you can't say how any help is going to change the dynamics on the battlefield, then all you're doing is causing more people to die on the Ukraine side.
Yeah, I mean, we're singing from the same hymn sheet. Whether it's politics or business, if you have a goal, you create a plan, you create a strategy, you then have tactics to implement that strategy or that plan. They have none. Our strategy is Putin's weak. We keep tightening the sanctions. They are working. They might not manifest themselves right now. You might not see the manifestation of right now, but they are happening. They are weak. They are weakening Russia. And then you just get all the same guff, the same propaganda. But there is absolutely there's no objectives, or there's no scalable objectives in terms of we're going to do A, then we're going to do B. That will lead us to C and D, and then we're going to push to do blah, 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 blah. There is none of that, because none of that exists.
Now, this seems to be, Ian, this seems to get back to what you said earlier. Now, especially you and I talking here, if you say that out loud, the next question I'm going to ask is, well, where is it? Why not? And, and I'm going to hold them accountable for this, which is what our channel does. But as you said a minute ago, that George Galloway had observed that there doesn't seem to be the big figures in Parliament, but that would also seem to mean that there's not the kind of thought process among them that would have them require of their leadership to explain those things in public, because the sentiment may be fine. I mean, it's perfectly valid if anybody in the West wants to say Russia invaded Ukraine, they should be forced to leave by the international, rules of the road and laws and all that sort of thing. That's a reasonable position to hold. But if you can't make it happen at an acceptable cost, and to fail to recognize what the cost would be, and instead, use about this much cost, then it can't be accomplished. Then you're wasting your resources. You're harming your own country, because now you're not using those resources there, and you're extending a war that can't be won. So there's more people dying.
Well, they don't have the numbers. I mean, if you just forget money, forget resources, forget weapons. Okay, Russia has X amount of resources and soldiers. Ukraine has a tiny proportion. They've lost over six. Well, I know I'm going over, old ground, but 600,000 dead. They're pulling people off the streets, as you know, is outrageous, and we support that. And the reason that we get to support that is because we have a very compliant media. So, for example, Nigel Farage. I mean, I like Nigel Farage. He sent me a very nice email many years ago congratulating me on something, and I was really, really chuffed that he took the time to send that to me from Strasbourg when he was over in Brussels. But he said 2 weeks ago that Putin was provoked, and all of the press, the mainstream media, said that he was a Kremlin stooge, a Putin puppet, and all this kind of stuff, and he gave tangible reasons for saying that about the 2014 CIA coup, and and he's a man of principle. Even if you disagree with his principles, he's a man of principle. He's consistent. He doesn't bend to the wind like many politicians. And he gave a speech in the European Parliament saying that in 5 to 6 years, he got that bit wrong, by the way, it's taken a bit longer, but the EU will be at war with Russia because we are provoking, and we're provoking Russia. And at the end, he said, stop poking the bear. And that's what we've done from day one. But if you say that, you're a Kremlin stooge, a Putin puppet, you've swallowed the Russian Kool-Aid, even though that what you're saying is true. It's a lose-lose because, people trust the media, and the media is compliant. It doesn't ask any critical questions. It just parrots the government narrative. And there's your problem.
Well, yeah, that is your problem. And we've got a similar case and similar dynamic on this side of the Atlantic Ocean.
Of course.
And of course, ours is exacerbated a little bit here because of the guy who's running the show. We're not sure that he's on it at any one given point. There's going to be a big speech here tonight given on ABC News, our time. We were wondering at first what it might be, but now then actually just before, literally right before you and I went on the air here, he gave a live speech, campaign speech, where he emphatically said, I am absolutely going to keep going in this campaign and I'm still planning to win, etc. So if anybody hoped that he was going to resign tonight, that seems to have been dashed already, but I'm not sure that's going to make any difference in the reality on the ground.
He must have been pumped with medication to be able to have said that.
Yeah, something, because he was very adamant or engaged in that speech. So quite different than it was during the debate. So we'll see which Joe Biden shows up tonight on television here. But listen, in the last few minutes I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your friend George Galloway. I saw that he was not able to win that election in Rochdale this time. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about what happened with there and what he's going to do now.
I don't know. He's a fighter. I mean, George Galloway, he's a fighter through and through. Very, very principled. Again, even if you disagree with what he says, if you disagree with his principles, if you disagree with his political stance, he's been consistent all his life. Is he upset? I think he is personally. And why wouldn't he be? He's put his heart and soul into trying to make this happen. But he started the Workers' Party. It has some momentum. Does it have I mean, in the recent election, he was not mentioned in any debates. So when they did polling, they would talk about, the Conservatives, the Reform Party. The Reform Party had no MPs and no councillors. At least George Galloway's party had a member of parliament and elected councillors. They were not even mentioned. And you put George Galloway in front of a camera in a debate with whoever, he was put on this earth to do that. Trust me, he's the best. He's fantastic. He's absolutely fantastic. I mean, he's an interview with Piers Morgan, and Piers Morgan absolutely said, I absolutely disagree with you on all the whole Ukraine thing. And he put up some and George Galloway put up robust arguments. That was not shown on TV. Obviously, that's just online. But that had 7 million views.
Wow.
Across all the platforms. And I tweeted it out and said, look at the comments. This is on Piers Morgan's own YouTube channel. Look at the comments underneath. And I went through a few pages and then just gave up. Every comment is pro George Galloway. Agree with George Galloway. George Galloway's right. George Galloway's right. George Galloway makes sense. George Galloway. But you just can't see him on mainstream media because there's a blackout, because they don't want his kind of politics. But his kind of politics, whether you agree with it or not, is important for democracy. I believe that.
Well, yeah, and that's it's unfortunate that he's not going to be serving anymore. But obviously, we're still hoping at some point to get him here on our channel. We'd love to get some more visibility and expansion to his views, because again, he is a polarizing figure, and some like him, some don't like him. But he certainly has got a lot of the facts on his side, and we hope that he continues to go on, because anybody who talks about the truth and the reality on the ground is somebody we advocate. So please do pass along to him and to his family, and we'll see what happens from here.
Thank you, Colonel.
And thank you, Ian, for coming on today and giving us, some insights into what's been going on here, so that the American side has at least some idea of what's really going on behind all these big numbers here. And we really appreciate you making that clear for us. And so, sorry about that. Yeah. All right. Listen, we got more for you tonight. I mentioned there just a second ago that President Biden is going to be on ABC News tonight. We have a pre-show where Matt Ho and I are going to talk a little bit about, what that thing may be, because there's a lot of mystery about exactly what's going to happen, because the ABC News changed their original plan. So the assumption was something big is going to be in the media interview. But as it's turning out now, literally just before we came on air here, Biden said, I don't care what you've heard, I'm definitely going to stay in the race. So that seems to have changed some of the expectation. But we're going to tune in tonight and find out what it is. Then right after the debate, we also have some post-interview reaction with the ever-popular Larry Johnson. You're not going to want to miss that too. So we'll break down whatever he says, and whatever happens, you'll get the truth one way or the other. So be sure and join us back tonight for a primetime show of our own that we haven't had yet. And we're looking forward to that. So we'll see you later tonight on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.